What are you doing to fill up the empty places in your soul? I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me on this episode. We all have empty places. Stuff happens to us. And often what we do to fill that up ends up causing more destruction. For many, that's porn. The story you are about to hear today is one of deep brokenness and amazing redemption. It's a story of God coming into the worst possible circumstances and bringing miraculous grace and more goodness than you could ever imagine. It's also a story about addressing those empty places in your soul. In this case, around porn. Joshua Broome is my guest on this story. Joshua is an adult film star turned preacher. I'll let him tell you his story. It is quite something. Joshua is now happily married. He and his wife Hope have 4 children. He has written a book, 7 Lies That Will Ruin Your Life: What My Journey from Porn Star to Preacher Taught Me About the Truth That Sets Us Free. I don't want to give away any of the details. I think you will find this fascinating and inspiring. Here is our conversation. Well, Joshua, it is a joy to have you on the program. Thanks so much. We worked to get this time, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
awesome to have you.
so glad to be here, and I feel like it's been a lifetime since we were together in Oregon, but
Yep.
here we are again. So glad to
Yes.
be here on this, having this conversation with you.
Yeah. You have a story, and I want to start there. We're going to talk about your book, and there's just so much you have to give. But for people who may not be familiar with your story, if you can just give the short version of what brought you to where you are now.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. But I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, and part of my story is that in that small town, my mom was 15 when she got pregnant with me, 16 when she had me, and my father lived in that same town. They were never in a super strong, committed relationship. So once I was born, their relationship ended, and I never really had a relationship with him.
Yeah.
But the complexity of that was that we were in such close proximity in such a small town. As I grew up, I would see him around. So you know the this this struggle that I had as a child, knowing that all of my peers had a dad. I had a dad in theory, but I didn't have a dad in my life. So, as a child, just the way that the brain works, I tried to make sense of that conflict, that confusion, and the narrative or the solution that I came up with is that there must be something wrong with me, and it must be my fault that he's not in my life. So then I thought, well, if I'm the cause of the problem, I must be the solution. So I think most people have a high achiever personality, and that kind of plays into if you add brokenness into something that functions in a certain way. You're not going to get the output that was intended. So this high achiever personality and this very driven young man's mind, he believed that, well, if I become enough in this world, then maybe I will feel as if I'm enough. And what I really wanted to hear was, "Son, I'm proud of you." And I thought that maybe I could earn enough achievements and accolades and the approval from other people to kind of mitigate that void in my life.
Yeah.
So, you know, tried to be the best student, tried to be the best athlete, so on and so on. So not bad things, but wrong motives. And around 12 or 13, 2 things happened kind of in the same season. I started modeling and acting, predominantly modeling, and I saw pornography for the first time. I was at my cousin's home, and his dad had a stash of magazines, and he showed me, and I didn't know how to feel.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to deal with the emotions. I felt simultaneously, curiosity and shame. And with me, I think it's so important that I share that, grew up in this home without a dad and never had any kind of conversations about sex. And I think, you think about attachment theory and the way that we develop, our emotions. With me, I never had a visual example of a healthy dynamic between a man and a woman. Never saw my mom in a healthy relationship, really no relationship at all. And my grandmother and grandfather, they lived in that same home, but they slept in separate rooms. She had a back problem. He got up at 4 a.m. to go fishing every day. And um, it so there was never conflict between my grandmother and grandfather, but I never saw connection.
Yeah.
So my understanding of what intimacy was pretty minimal. And the Bible tells us you're either being conformed by the world or you're being transformed by the renewing of your mind. The world conformed what I thought intimacy was and what I thought sex was in that moment, where I saw on these pages a man and a woman connecting in a way. And I thought, well, maybe that's the love or the connection or whatever I'm missing out on. And I believed if I partook in what I saw in some way, I will feel the emotions that I didn't. And that kind of started this journey of me watching that content, and then me superimposing what I saw onto the young women that I was pursuing as a teenager. And that became another part of my conquest of can I get this girl to go on a date with me or whatever. And that was kind of just how I lived my life up until college. Played basketball, was in a fraternity, all this stuff. Modeling and acting was going pretty well. It was going so well that I was speaking with an agent in Los Angeles, and they said, "Hey, if you're here in proximity, I would love to represent you. I think that you would do well. You've got a decent body of work, and I think between your theater experience in college and the body of work that you've had modeling both runway and commercial, I think that you would do well." So I decided to kind of drop out of college, not finish my degree, and move out to Hollywood. And I had an agent, and I was going on auditions, and modeling was going better than acting, but just kind of the going to auditions. Had the opportunity to be at the Improv in LA, which was a huge honor. Loved doing stuff like that. So life was good. There was nothing wrong in my life. I had this broken heart and this father wound, but my mom was amazing. She obviously was pretty skeptical about me being in LA, but super supportive. Had a great relationship with her. Had a friend group, nucleus of people that weren't necessarily good friends, but they were in my life. The kind of whatever I was doing, they were probably doing some of the same things, like going out partying, stuff like that, trying to figure out life. And in the middle of that, about 2 years into my time in LA, I was at a bar and three girls came up to me. And long story short, they were headhunters for a porn agency. And they said, "Hey, would you consider being in a film, in a pornographic film?" And I was pretty taken back by it. But, I shared everything to kind of contextualize, my thinking at the
Yeah.
time. Because when you don't have a good reason to say no, even if you have some kind of inkling of, this is a bad idea, if there's no foundational why not, then sometimes you'll say yes to something you ought to say no to. And curiosity got the best of me. Years of being promiscuous and watching pornography got the best of me. And I didn't count the cost. I thought, I'm probably going to just pick up a camera. So this is like 2006. I'm going to pick up some kind of camcorder, record it, and get a check for it, whatever. Not very different than the way I was living, and I did it, and pretty quickly it changed everything about my life. In 2006, very different world that we live in right now. So when my manager that was representing me found out that my name was now attached to this, she's like, "Joshua, I'm super sorry, but um, we can't be attached to your likeness because we don't want to be associated with that." So I get essentially fired by my manager. And then it seems like right after that, the thing about growing up in a small town is it only takes one person to know one thing for everyone to know everything. And through the grapevine, my uncle found out, and then he told my mom, and then my mom called me and had this super awkward, shame-filled conversation about me admitting that I had, yes, done a pornographic film. And then I allowed that shame to create a narrative. If you believe a lie to be true, it's true to you. And I lived as if that lie was true. So what I believed was that I ruined my life. And the only thing I could do was continuing doing the thing that I'd done, which makes no sense in retrospect. I was 22 years old. I like maybe I could not have continued acting and modeling in the context that I was, but the thought that I couldn't do anything else is just untrue. But I believe that, so that's the way that I lived my life. I thought, okay, I've disqualified myself from being my mother's son because I hurt the only person that had never hurt me. I blew it, and now I can't model and act. So the closest thing to that is continuing in this industry. So I doubled down. I thought, okay, well, I'm not just going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to become the best. I'm going to make most money. I'm going to become the most popular. And maybe if I do that, that would equate to happiness in some context. And I stayed in that industry for 6 years. I did over 1,000 movies. I won every award that you could win. I made more money than I thought I would ever have access to in my life. And at the end of 6 years, I won this award, Performer of the Year, and I attached a lot of belief to that award. In that I thought if I won that award, it would not only validate me in my mind, but I thought it would somehow undo
Yes.
the feeling of like worthlessness that I had. And
Yes.
again, I'm searching for how can I externally obtain something to mitigate the deficit that I have emotionally and mentally. Like, how can I fix me? How the way that I phrase it is, I spent a lot of my life trying to put enough good dirt on my bad dirt so I didn't feel dirty. I
Mm,
tried to, I was trying to stack that equity in a way.
yeah.
But when I won that award, when it didn't make me feel like I thought it would, immediately the anxiety that already existed amplified, depression that already existed, it was deepened. And I thought, well, if this is not going to fix me, there's no going back. And I'm not very excited about what's ahead of me. If I'm stuck, then I began to look for a way out. And that's when suicidal ideation became part of my story. And that went on for quite some time. And there were a barrage of things that happened in that. There's about a 6 month period where, if we want to dig back into that time, we can. But the darkest time in my life, and at the end of that, as it got as dark as it could possibly be, I walk into a bank and I wanted someone to agree with me that I was exactly as dirty and disgusting as I thought I was, and the way that I was going to. It's funny because I'm giving a talk about this at a marriage conference in 2 weeks, but talking about true intimacy is not compliance, it's connection.
Yes.
Um, but just thinking about, I wanted to manipulate this person and I wanted to manipulate her reaction so that I got what I wanted. Like that was my value proposition. So I wanted to go in this bank. I handed her a check, and on the memo of the check, it was clear what I was compensated for. And I thought when I handed her that, she would respond a certain way. And when she didn't respond like I thought she did, I didn't know what to do. And not only did she not respond like I hoped she would, she actually come around the corner and looked me in the eyes and said, "Joshua, are you okay?
Mm,
Joshua, how can I help you?"
mm,
And that kind of snapped me out of this plausible reality that I'd created based on shame and hurt. And what I kind of woke up to was like, man, I've withheld from my mom the thing that she wants most, which is just to know that I'm okay.
yes.
I was in the industry in a time where people are dying of HIV, suicide, overdose. I've been out of that industry for over 10 years. 40 people that were dear friends of mine dead of suicide, overdose. Every roommate I've ever had but one dead.
Wow.
So the thought process of my mom, like, it's not like I'm on spring break and I haven't called. Like, this is a year of seeing, on the news or on social media or whatever, people dying in the industry that her son's working in, and her calling and texting me and me not responding because I thought that I was doing her a favor in some way, but it was actually selfishness, because I thought, well, I disqualified myself from being her son. And I thought, well, um, what value can I offer? Like I've lost the ability to love this person or receive love from her. But I think what was more true is that I didn't think I could fix it, and because I couldn't fix it, the only thing was left was to admit that to be accountable that I made a bad decision, and that bad decision, it was just like collateral damage, like
It
just one
snowballed.
bad.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I got to that point. So I had the interaction with that bank teller. That made me call my mom. My mom said everything that I didn't think she would say after she chewed me out. She said that you'll always be my son. I love you, and I think you should please come home because you're worth so much more than the way that you're living. And I came home, and then I spent 2 years. Even though I was removed from that the toxic environment and the toxic things I was doing, and the what wasn't removed were the toxins that were in my mind.
Yeah.
And I quickly just did the same thing, just a different avenue. Started working in the health and fitness space, working at a gym, got a bunch of credentials, got a great mentor, got all the certifications, worked my way up at the best gym, became popular, became successful, made money, did the same thing for 2 years. And then I met this girl. And, 2 years removed from being in that industry, I met this girl and I was like, I gotta tell her who I am. Um, and honestly, it was in selfishness. It's like she's gonna hurt me once she knows who I am, and she's not gonna want anything to do with me. So the best way that I can protect her myself, the best way to protect myself from being hurt, and I would love to dig into this in a few minutes, just around the necessity for friendship and how friendship is scary when you're broken because you don't want to be seen and you feel like your worth is minimal. Um, but I was like, hey, I'm this kid that his daddy didn't want, and I've done all this bad stuff, and every bad thing I've ever done that I'm really ashamed of is actually accessible on the internet. So I'm sure you're not going to want anything to do with me. And her response was, hey, I don't want to minimize the pain that you're feeling. And I don't want to say that, those things, that shame that you feel and the pain that you feel, I don't want to, deter from that or dishonor you in any way. But what I do want to tell you is you're not defined by the worst thing you've ever done. And you're not defined by the greatest thing you'll ever accomplish because you are not the author of you. God
Mm.
is. Do you know him? And I didn't. And she shared with me that she'd been following Jesus since she was in the seventh grade. She wasn't perfect by any means, but he was the foundation of her life. And then she invited me to church. And then there's this beautiful story that, her name is Hope. And she's been my wife for 9 years, and we've got 4 kids. And that weekend that she invited me to church, I heard this sermon on Second Samuel where Mephibosheth was wrestling with the grace that's offered by David, and I saw myself in that picture, and I got arrested by the Holy Spirit and just felt God's love wash over me, and realized the Father that I was longing for so desperately I had access to. He was waiting on me, and as the prodigal son, it's like you take one step towards God, and God runs towards you, and puts a ring on your finger, a robe on your back, sandals on your feet, and throws a party because the son has came home. And that was the moment that I experienced. That was 10 years ago, and since then, I fell in love with God's word. God's word eradicated lies that I had in my life, and um, God had been preparing me, unbeknownst to me, to communicate, and go to Liberty University, study Christian ministries, have the opportunity to speak and to preach, and I've been doing that full time for about 5 years. But I love that there was 5 years before I ever stood on a platform or did a podcast or anything like that. Um, just sitting with God,
Yeah.
going through counseling, being healed in silent, not sharing what I was going through, just learning God's word and letting God's love heal me in ways that I never saw possible. So that those are the parts of my story that I love to share the most. Like, yeah, like there is this like this crazy redemption story and this arc that I never saw coming. But what I love is that I had these wounds, but now I still have the scars from those wounds. But those scars, they tell a story that people can relate to, and I'm honored to be vulnerable about them. But ultimately, they point to a healer in the person of Jesus, but also they point to a process of, with me, it's trusted relationships, counseling, God's word, eradicating bad habits, replacing those habits, eradicating wrong thinking, so many things. But yeah, so I love talking to intelligent people like you that understand both theology and the clinical aspect of it because I think it's important. But yeah, so that's in a I know you asked me to do a short version. I get carried away sometimes.
That's
But yeah,
awesome,
like that's
Joshua. Yeah.
yeah,
Seriously, that's awesome. You have given a treatise there, and the redemption story is amazing. And I love how you highlight both the moment when God arrests you, and then the process of transformation
yeah,
that can take some time. There's a couple things that I just want to narrow in on, and there's so many that we could. But
yeah,
one that I wanted to invite you to comment on when you and I first had a chance to meet briefly, I was privileged to hear you speak at a conference, and one of the things you said there is that we don't, meaning people in general, watch porn because we like it. We watch it because it works. What do
yeah.
you mean by that? What problem does porn solve?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, each and every person, I believe, is created by God in the image of God, and there's a part of your humanity you long for connection, and that longing is you're longing for a connection with the Creator, but also with people. And I think again, you kind of touch on attachment theory. As you're a child, the way that you develop an understanding of your emotions, sometimes there is a wrong thought pattern or a bad experience that enters into a place that God intended to be good, and all of a sudden, we would call it sin. But I think the way that porn works is that each and every person desires to be needed and known and to connect with other people. And the way that porn works is, there's a real dopamine hit that goes to your synaptic cleft. There's a real, like, it's fictitious, but it feels real that I'm connected to a person and experience. But really, what I've done is I've experienced a counterfeit version or a so much less than version of the abundance that God wants me to experience. So I would say that that's why it works. The dopamine hit is real. That the high is real, the enjoyment is real, the pleasure is real, but it's so much less than and actually deceptive in contrast of what real intimacy actually is.
Yeah. I think that is so powerful because you know the statistics also, and I've talked about that occasionally on this podcast, that the huge numbers of people who are in some way hooked. The porn industry you wouldn't have made the money that you did, God forbid,
Yeah,
if this wasn't such a hook in people's brains. And I see it as evil exploiting something that God created us to legitimately need, and the kingdom of darkness hijacks that for, like you say, a counterfeit. Um,
yeah.
in
Yeah, I
your
mean,
own,
you think about what marriage is for in
yeah,
general, to reflect God, to reproduce, and also uh, to reveal like God to the world, right? Where like you want to connect with one another in this beautiful way. You are, procreating and, but you're not just procreate. Like the plan is not just like, hey, let's have as many babies as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
It's a like to reproduce image bearers of God that reflect His glory.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean that's where like sex comes into play, where like sex is this beautiful gift from God that is for connection, but when you use anything outside of, or if you use something outside of the way that it was designed to be used, well, there's problems, and when it's regardless of what it might be, when I use something outside of its intended purpose or its original design, I'm not going to get the output that the designer originally intended. So when I use sex in a way, or use people in a way where I'm looking at, well, I'm supposed to use things,
Yeah.
love people, and if I start using people and loving things,
Yeah.
well, the byproduct of that is brokenness and pain, and not just towards them, but you. And then you contribute to a broken culture, and it continues to, to perpetuate like in this world. And I spend a lot of my time. I'm in DC tomorrow. I'll be in DC tomorrow. I was there last week talking about so many things, fighting for age verification. So,
Yep.
age verification is being challenged in this world by a free speech coalition, saying it's infringement on the First Amendment. But the age verification, it's just saying, hey, kids should be protected,
Mhm.
or at least have some kind of barrier to access things that neurologically have been proven that are detrimental to their brain. We can go on and on about how it's wrong from a biblical standpoint, or a moral standpoint even, but also the way it contributes to society are incredibly negative. But even deeper than that, it's impacting their brain in a way where if it's eroding their prefrontal cortex and they can't make good decisions, and all of a sudden their prudency or their ability to be resilient is diminished, well, that's a huge problem for kids. That's a huge problem. So I think, like, why would we say, okay, alcohol, tobacco, rated R movies, that makes sense, but then pornography, it's like, no, like it's an infringement on adults to have a barrier to see something they want to see. That's a different conversation than, should we have barriers to protect kids from seeing something they're seeing at a ridiculous, you know, at a ridiculous amount. Because I mean, the data, it's like
Yeah.
you don't have to look for it. It's everywhere. Like you,
It
and
is. And
yeah, and
I am so glad you are working toward that, Joshua. You've seen it from both angles, both as, quotes, a provider, which I hate that term, and then as a consumer, and
yeah,
the damage from both things. You've mentioned the impact on brain pathways. You've mentioned that just in telling your story, and you've mentioned it just now, and what porn does for kids. You've talked about it in your book. One of the things in your book, Seven Lies, that intrigued me was you described how your, for lack of a better way to say it, your ability to be sexually aroused by a person was impacted, and all the
yeah,
drugs you had to use by the time you exited the industry and so on. Then, a couple years later, you meet Hope. And
mm,
I imagine that there was some, attraction there, but in the brain pathways in your own brain that had been impacted by those years. Um, what did that process look like for you in having to rebuild that so that you could experience intimacy with Hope, um, physically as well, not only
yeah.
physically, but just how sex and arousal and intimacy, your own brain had to be rewired.
Yeah, I mean, I love, again, like Romans 12:1 talks about, in response to God's mercy. If you back up, Romans 11 talks about that, talking about Jesus, by him, for him, through him, all things are made. And then in view of God's mercy, what was his mercy? I don't want to give like a whole Bible lesson, but like you look at Romans 1, God's made himself evident in his creation. Romans
Yep.
3:23, we've all sinned. Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. Romans 10:9, If you confess with your mouth that He's Lord, you will be saved. But then you get to 12, and it's saying, in view of God's mercy, if you're going to accept that God has withheld what you deserved, and you're going to accept that, then what? Well, a reasonable response is for you to live your life as a living sacrifice. And then Romans 12:2 talks about we're not to be conformed by the world, we're to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. We're to go through this mental and emotional metamorphosis so that we can discern God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. We want to develop the ability to have discernment. So for me, a few things happened. So because she was rooted in her faith, when I met her, like physical intimacy was not on the table.
Yeah.
So I think that there was some withdrawal there and some confusion. It wasn't because I wanted it wasn't because I didn't try. It wasn't because there wasn't a desire on my part to do that. It just was off the table. So I think like part of that was beautiful in that I had to learn what human interaction was like in a new way.
Yes.
Because with me, like outside of my mom, like I didn't have, sisters, anything like that, like growing up really, aunts, whatever. Like other than my mom, every experience that I had with a woman was romantic, and romantic was to me was physical intimacy. So I had to get to a point to like understand and appreciate and value and honor her, and that was happening kind of simultaneously in that I had to learn to be a friend, and I had to learn to be what it meant to be a godly husband even, and that came from me understanding what it meant to be a son, and not just a son to my earthly father, but a son to my heavenly father. And you know and then through receiving his love and allowing his love to allow me to love myself.
Yeah.
I think like that was the part that led up to me getting to a place where how do I navigate these God given emotions to
Yes.
this physical
Yes.
attraction towards her.
Yes.
So I think it was just a lot of unlearning and a lot of
Yes.
new learning, and like developing like good communication patterns, asking questions, asking more questions than I've been giving answers, and I think again, you like this is good because like this is part of the talk that I have. Like a big aha moment for me was that naturally we want to love people the way that we receive love.
Yeah.
Gary Chapman has that book, love language, the five love languages,
Yeah.
and for me, words of affirmation, physical touch, but for Hope, it was quality time. And her telling me quality time, even then, I thought, okay, quality movie, quality date, quality like whatever, because it was do. Because I had such a hard time receiving, I couldn't
Mhm.
understand that. And essentially, she was like the greatest present or the greatest thing that you could do for me is for me to have your full attention, your presence, like you unattached from your phone, not doing anything. Maybe we're at dinner, but maybe we're not. Maybe we're just like sitting on the end of a pier,
Yeah.
and the water is completely placid. There's not a ripple anywhere, and there's nothing but me and you. And that was so uncomfortable to me because I was so convinced that there was like I was inadequate. So
Yeah.
like how could this inadequate, broken person, like I was confident in the things that I could do, but I was so insecure regarding who I was.
Yes.
And she like she loved me in a way that allowed me to see God's love different. And it was like in that process, what happened was, once our wedding night came and we were physically intimate, what I was experiencing was love in a way that I never knew existed, and actually was real love in contrast to lust.
Yeah.
Because I had to break so many wrong thought patterns to get to a place where there was real connection there. So not compliance,
Yep.
but real connection. And when there's real connection, there's an electricity that you can't manifest. And I think that's where I wouldn't like argue that, like lingerie or toys or all this stuff, that like we don't mess around with any of that stuff. And I wouldn't say there's anything necessarily like sinful about them, but when you're trying to use external things to manipulate emotions, I think like the thing that you're trying to create, you can't manifest that. You can't manipulate it because it comes from within and it
That's
comes
good.
from connection, and connection is hard and it takes work and honesty and openness and vulnerability. So I think you'll never get like the sex that you desire that will equate to the satisfaction that you experience. You can't manipulate that with external things. That's going to come, between you and that person, eye to eye, completely open and vulnerable, and connecting with each other in a way that things can't contribute to.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm really glad you separated out lust from what real love is. And I
Right.
might also just say, I think some people confuse lust with sexual desire. God gave
Sure.
sexual desire as a part of the way He created us. Would you just comment on how you differentiate those things? How you differentiate lust from love? How do you differentiate lust from sexual desire?
Yeah, I would say so. So lust is if you if you've had a chart, it's like okay, for me to identify lust, and if I'm in agreement that love and lust are not the same thing, well, let's look at that. Well, love is selfless. Love is long suffering. Love is patient. Love is kind. Um, and I would say, okay, well, then what's lust? And I would say it's selfish. It's self-absorbed. It's about a value proposition. So it's like I'm trying to extract something from you in contrast to experiencing something with you. So I would say like that would be the big difference. So sexual desire, again, God-given emotion, where I can appreciate someone's beauty
Yes,
outside of being sexually attracted to that person. But then when sexual desire comes into the place, well, the Bible tells us, well, there's no temptation that is, so great that you don't have the capacity to overcome. You have the opportunity to take everything captive and make it obedient to Christ. So we are not to be uh, we're not to allow our feelings or emotions to be the driver of our actions,
that's good.
because when we have a foundation that's bigger than ourselves or outside of ourselves, well, okay, these are core values that I have. These are things that I'm committed to being as a person. There's a higher being in God that I am held accountable to, and then also I'm held accountable to my wife. So I'm going to live in such a way that I am not a slave to my every feelings, but also I don't want to suppress my feelings. I don't want to say, okay, I'm feeling this, let's just suppress it and get it out of there. I've gotten to an extent, and I think like what would benefit a lot of people if we could, increase our emotional intelligence, where I'm experiencing something. Okay, let's drag this into the light and say it out loud. Like that is the thing that has allowed me to experience so much freedom. Every Friday, there's an individual that I have about an hour conversation with, and we say all the stuff, whatever I'm thinking, the good, the bad, the ugly. These are things I'm processing. These are things I'm going through. This is something I said that I didn't wish I had said. This is something I thought that I didn't wish I would have thought. And then this is what I did with those thoughts. Or here's a win, in my life. Like this happened, and this is the way I responded. And I was super proud of myself. I'm just saying it all out loud. And I think, you know, a lot of people are not necessarily external processors. I am, but having a trusted person in your life that can hear you and help you see yourself in a different light and even process your information with you in a different light, I think is so, so helpful.
Right. Awesome. That kind of harps back to something you alluded to as you were telling your story that you wanted to come back to, and I do too. And that is friendship and
Yeah.
being honest, letting yourself be seen. And when you are stuck in shame and brokenness, that's hard. You have had to walk the journey to get from that and just your initial interactions with Hope and I'm going to use the word fear of her seeing you, who you really were, to now you make it a weekly practice to be seen and nurturing intimacy with Hope in all ways, physical, emotional,
Yeah.
spiritual. Um, and you've kind of hinted at this, but I would guess you believe that that journey to having somebody see you and know you and bringing the shame and the brokenness into the light is absolutely vital if you are seeking to get out of that, to find
Oh
any
yeah.
good. You have to do that. So talk a bit about that process, especially for somebody who right now might feel stuck in that brokenness.
Yeah, I mean Thomas Kempis talks a lot about habit replacing habit. You have to you can't just like take something out of your life. There's got to be something that goes into that void.
Yeah,
And part of that for me is or what is true in general is either your past is going to own you or you can own it, and the way that you own it is you drag it all into the light. Where there is light, there can't be darkness. So for me, to the person that you have that thing, maybe something happened to you, maybe you're stuck in an unwanted behavior.
yep,
You got to say the thing that feels unmentionable. You got to say it out loud to someone you trust. Ideally, someone you trust that loves Jesus.
yes,
Say all of it, and I would say the clarity of your confession is going to equate to the a greater level of freedom. And
that's
what I
right.
mean by that is if you say, hey, there's this site that I go to and I watch stuff that I shouldn't. In contrast of there's a specific website that I go to, and when I go to that website, I put this in the search bar, and this is the type of porn that I look at, and then I masturbate, and I feel terrible about it, and sometimes I even go back to it and do it again. And I think like all of those details when I'm talking about like the things that I'm searching, this can be uncomfortable for some people, but the thing that you put in the search bar is actually a direct correlation to a wound that you have in some way. It's a wrong thinking, and you're trying to mitigate that brokenness yourself, and it's showing up in the type of porn you consume, but it's actually pointing you to a potential solution. So I'd say find someone, say all the things, say it all, and don't stop doing that. Like if you can live your life, we call them hot conversations, open, honest, transparent. If you can live your life that way, and then for me, it's like you live your life that way. Find someone you can be honest with. Read the Bible every day. Surrender and submit your life to Jesus Christ. Believe His word, live it out.
The end of our conversation kind of got cut off in our recording. So that was a little abrupt, but I know that Joshua's story and his message of hope and redemption and what true intimacy, true love is, was inspiring to you. Do, under this video, check the links. We have the link there to Joshua's book, 7 Lies That Will Ruin Your Life, what my journey from porn star to preacher taught me about the truth that sets us free. We have a link to Joshua's website, his advocacy for age verification, as he referenced, is a just really strong piece of what he is doing currently, and invite your prayers for him in that. Joshua travels around talking to churches and other groups about the lies of porn and the truth that sets us free. I just encourage you to bring whatever brokenness is in your soul into the light with somebody else. Speak it, like Joshua said, out loud. Say what seems unmentionable, and then also to Jesus. He is ready to meet you, and He can turn everything around. I want to let you know about a resource we have at Dr. Carroll Ministries, our Sexpectations online course. This will help you, and it will give you a pathway to do the kind of things that Joshua was talking about. Look at your story with honesty and compassion. What is an appropriate way to tell somebody the details, to tell Jesus the details? And then invite Jesus into the middle of your story so that you can experience healing and transformation. That will set you free. The link is under this video, yoursexpectations.com. I want to let you know also that I love to hear from you. If you leave a message under this video, I read every one. And when I can offer something helpful, I respond. You can also leave me a confidential message. Use the contact page on our website, drcarolministries.com. That comes to me confidentially. And again, I read everyone, and whenever I can offer something helpful, I do. Thank you for being part of our online family here and for staying with me until the end of this episode. We have a number of resources on our yoursexpectations.com website. Many of them are free, and I invite you to come check that out and find your journey to wholeness that Jesus has for you. And until next time, may God bless you.